Hi, my name's Kaelen. On my 17th birthday, my parents told me I was adopted just like that, over store-bought cake and a duffel bag they'd already packed. But they didn't know I had already found the papers, the name they erased, the life they buried. They didn't give me away out of love. They were cutting me loose, before I could tell the world what they did. Why would a family replace a child, then try to delete the one who came after? What kind of lie is big enough to make a girl disappear twice? You'll want to hear this. There are birthdays you remember because of the cake, the laughter, or the warmth of people who care about you. Then there are birthdays you remember because they strip away something you didn't even realize you still needed. Mine was the second kind. It started with the smell of vanilla, oddly enough. Vera never baked not on holidays, not for school events, not even when Isolde won those pageant crowns they displayed like family heirlooms. But that morning, the scent lingered through the vents, like it had something to prove. I laid there longer than usual, tucked under my thrifted quilt, staring at the crack in the ceiling I'd memorized every inch of. It didn't feel like a celebration. It felt staged. When I finally walked into the kitchen, there was a cake store-bought, from what I could tell, but smothered in frosting to look homemade. Isolde sat at the counter, tapping through her phone like I was background noise. Vera was wiping a spotless counter, and Rainer, he wasn't even in the room. No one said happy birthday. That's when I felt it. That quiet kind of shift, like when you realize you're not being ignored, you're being removed. I should have turned around and walked right back out. Instead, I waited. The day dragged. No gifts, no calls. I knew better than to expect a party, but something in me still held on to the foolish hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would surprise me with the truth I hadn't dared to ask for. It came, eventually. Late afternoon. I was still in my pajamas, sitting on the couch with a book I hadn't actually read. Rainer called me into the living room. His tone was stiff, controlled, his voice the one he used when he talked to bank tellers and judges. Vera was already seated, hands folded too neatly in her lap. Isolde was perched on the edge of the armrest, watching but not participating. I sat. Rainer didn't look at me. Vera cleared her throat. "You're adopted," she said, like it was the weather. No softening, no let-in, just that. You were brought to us when you were 2. Your birth mother couldn't care for you. We did what we could. It wasn't shock that froze me, it was the way they said it. Like I was a package finally being delivered to its rightful owner, even if the box was battered and long past the return policy. My stomach didn't drop. My heartbeat didn't spike. It was quieter than that. Quieter and colder. Vera continued, her voice still in that performative calm. "We think it's time for you to find your own path now. You're old enough." Rainer leaned down and pulled something from under the couch. A duffel bag, cheap, faded, with a broken zipper and the smell of garage storage. He slid it toward me across the rug like it was some kind of peace offering. "There's money in there. Not a lot. You'll be staying at Oak Ridge Shelter for now. They'll help you get on your feet. Independence builds character. They weren't telling me I was adopted. They were kicking me out. No warning, no discussion, no second chance." I looked at Isolde. She avoided my eyes. Maybe she'd known. Maybe she hadn't. Either way, she wasn't going to speak up now. I stood. My fingers wrapped around the duffel handle, knuckles white against the canvas. I gave them a nod. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. A little too steady. They didn't hear what I didn't say. They didn't see what I was holding back. Because what they didn't know, what they could never have imagined, was that I'd already found the file. Weeks ago. Hidden behind tax folders and do not touch labels in Rainer's filing cabinet. It had been tucked behind old property records, sealed but not locked. Inside was a letter addressed to someone named Elena Vasila. Attached to it, a birth certificate with my name. And hers. No father listed. That's when I stopped waiting for the truth from them. That's when I started collecting my own. I didn't argue. I didn't scream or cry or ask why. I let them believe they'd caught me off guard, that I was the clueless child they still thought they could control. But I knew. I knew they weren't setting me free. They were trying to bury me quietly, and they had no idea I'd already started digging. I stepped outside into the cold with their bag in hand, holding a secret far heavier than anything they packed. Snow was falling harder now, coating the pavement in a thick white hush. The house behind me stayed dark, no one watching from the window, no one checking if Eid slipped on the ice. I didn't need to look back. That door had shut long before they ever told me I was adopted. The bus pulled up with a low hiss. Its headlights swept across the empty street like it was searching for someone who belonged. I climbed aboard without a word, choosing a seat in the back where I could press my forehead against the cold window and pretend I hadn't just been erased from the only life I knew. They thought they'd blindsided me. What they didn't know was I had already planned my exit long before they gave me theirs. The shelter didn't ask questions. A woman named Cheryl handed me a clipboard, a scratchy blanket, and the kind of smile people wear when they've seen too many kids like me. I filled out my name, birthday, emergency contact, which I left blank and was shown to a narrow cot near the radiator. The air inside Oak Ridge smelled like bleach and boiled potatoes. Nothing personal, nothing permanent. It didn't matter. I wasn't here to belong. I was here to breathe until I could move. That night, as the others snored or whispered or cried into pillows, I lay stiff on the mattress with the duffel bag clutched to my chest. It barely held any clothes. What mattered was the manila folder tucked deep inside, wedged between a cheap sweatshirt and 2 crumpled bills. That file wasn't about who they said I was. It was about who they'd tried to erase. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been looking for printer ink in Rayner's home office because, of course, the man kept a label maker but never stocked toner. I knew better than to snoop. But there was this one drawer, locked, with tape over the handle that read, Private. Tax archives. Something about how deliberate it was made me curious. And there it was, sloppy security for someone so controlled. A thin nail file from my pencil pouch, a little pressure under the latch, and it popped open like it wanted to talk. Inside, buried beneath folders marked mortgage refi and estate planning, was one labeled confidential. Maris Lynn, status. Closed. I didn't breathe for a moment. My fingers were cold as I opened it. Inside was a birth certificate mine, except it wasn't. The name at the top, Maris Lynn Brenner. Mother, Vera Brenner. Father, unlisted. Date of birth? Same as mine, except this document said the child was declared deceased, a thick black line through the word active. A note scribbled near the bottom. Reassignment approved. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then it hit me like a slap across the face. They didn't adopt me. They replaced her, and they used me to do it. I closed the file, slipped it under my shirt, and didn't say a word. That night, I didn't sleep. My brain replayed every offhand comment, every photo I wasn't in, every time someone said, "You don't look like the rest of them." The next day, I walked to the library. For the next 3 weeks, I went back every day after school. I used their scanners, copied every document from the file, and searched online archives. I opened accounts on ancestry sites. I looked into closed adoption policies in Montana. I pulled public death records. I wrote everything down in a leather notebook I kept on me like a second skin. I wasn't snooping anymore. I was documenting. At school, I smiled when I had to, laughed at the right jokes, turned in my homework on time. I couldn't let them know I knew. If I did, they'd take the rest of the truth away before I could get to it. The final puzzle piece came 2 days before my birthday. I was scanning medical billing archives, pretending to work on a scholarship essay, when I saw it. An emergency clinic file with Vera's signature. The name of the patient? Maris Lynn Brenner. Date? 8 months after the supposed death. My hands shook so hard the librarian asked if I needed a tissue. You don't sign as the emergency contact for a dead child, unless the child wasn't dead, or someone needed the world to think she was. That's when I knew I wasn't just adopted. I was a placeholder, a story patched together to keep something darker from leaking out. And that's also when I made my decision. I wouldn't confront them yet. Not until I had everything. Not until I was ready to show them the truth they buried under someone else's name. I thought that was the worst of it, until I saw how they'd erased me, not just from memories, but from every record that ever mattered. Sleep came in fits that night. The shelter mattress squeaked every time I shifted, and the radiator clanged like it was trying to make conversation. But what kept me awake wasn't the noise. It was the dream. That room, again soft pink walls, lace curtains, ballet slippers dangling from a doorknob. A lullaby hummed in a language I shouldn't understand. And yet I did. I woke up drenched in that dream like it was perfume I couldn't scrub off. For a while, I just laid there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just something I'd seen in a movie. But then that melody replayed in my head minor key, drifting vowels Romanian. The shelter lounge was mostly empty by dawn. A few kids hovered around a vending machine with broken buttons. I wandered to the donation corner, where people left clothes no one claimed. That's when I saw it. A child's jacket pink corduroy with white stitching, slightly frayed at the sleeves. My knees almost gave out. It was the same fabric as the blanket in the dream. I could feel it even before I touched it. My fingers grazed the edge, and a jolt went through me, not fear, not confusion. Recognition. I hadn't imagined the room. I'd lived in it. That jacket shoved every doubt aside, forced my memories to rearrange themselves into something sharper, less forgiving. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the notebook I kept on me like it was breathing. I flipped to the page I'd dog-eared 2 weeks ago. A name scribbled in all caps, Marvella Rains. I'd seen her listed as a school emergency contact in an old enrollment form I'd dug out from a forgotten district server. Housekeeper temporary placement. I searched her name again, this time on a cracked desktop in the rec room. One result came up, a long-term care home outside town. Rosevale Home. A bus route passed by twice a day. The next one was in 40 minutes. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just packed the essentials, file copies, and the jacket, and slipped out. The road out of Missoula curved through pine-lined stretches of frozen silence. Snow clung to bare branches like frostbite. My seat on the bus was cold, but my mind was buzzing hot with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. Rosevale sat behind a line of bare oaks, its brick exterior faded, windows reflecting winter's gray sky. Inside, everything smelled like bleach, stew, and old paperbacks. A nurse with tired eyes and a kind voice directed me down the hallway. "Room 104, she said. "She's quiet these days." I knocked gently. The door creaked open. There she was, Marvella. Thinner than in the photo I'd found in the file, hair grayer, eyes dim but alert. She sat in a recliner, knitting a baby blue square with no clear pattern. I stepped in, unsure of how to start. "Hi," I said. "I'm Kaelen. You might not remember me." She didn't respond right away, but her eyes studied my face like she was looking through it. "You have your mother's eyes," she murmured, "but not Vera's." I froze. She knew. I pulled the jacket from my bag and held it up. "Do you remember this?" Her lips trembled. She nodded slowly. Then tears welled up silent, steady. "They told me never to bring it up," she whispered. "Said it was too complicated. Said she didn't make it. But I knew someone would come asking one day." I crouched beside her chair. "Who didn't make it?" She looked past me, into something farther away than this room. "There was a fire," she said, "not big, but enough. And after there was a change. You were gone. But they brought another girl, told us to call her the same name, same clothes, same birthday. I wasn't allowed to say goodbye." My throat tightened. "And you just went along with it?" "I had no choice," she said, guilt pooling in her voice. "I was a housekeeper, not family, not anyone who mattered." She reached toward a drawer and pulled out a tattered photograph. The edges curled like paper trying to forget. In the picture, a toddler smiled shyly in a pale pink room. A woman with dark eyes knelt beside her, laughing. "That's the room," I said. My hand shook as I touched the photo. "That's me." Marvella closed her eyes. You were never adopted, Kaelen. You were inserted, like a puzzle piece that made the picture palatable again. I sat back, dizzy. The lie wasn't that I didn't belong. The lie was that I was a gift. I wasn't a second chance. I was a substitute, like a dish someone broke, then quietly replaced before anyone noticed. And if they thought I wouldn't say anything, they were right until now. I sat in the corner of the library, staring at a computer screen that had long gone dim. My hands hovered above the keyboard, but I couldn't bring myself to type anything else. For hours, I'd been digging, scanning yearbooks, archived newsletters, class rosters, everything from second grade through junior high. It wasn't what I saw that gutted me. It was what I didn't. There were gaps, places where I should have been field trip lists, student acknowledgments, birthday banners hung in the cafeteria. All the things that said, "You were here." But for me, nothing but silence printed on paper. One memory kept surfacing. I was 12 when Vera said it. Not angry, not loving, just matter of fact. We were folding laundry, and I'd held up one of Isolde's sweaters, admiring it. She looked at me and said, "You've always felt a bit different, not like the rest of us." Back then, I thought maybe it meant I was special. Now, I hear it for what it was. A subtle kind of exile. They hadn't raised me to belong. They'd raised me to disappear quietly. Later that day, I rode my bike, an old blue one I'd picked up from the shelter's donation binto the far side of town. It was cold, but not bitter. There was something about the bite of the wind that kept me focused. My destination, the home of Lynn Parker, one of the few kids from middle school who didn't treat me like I was a stray dog that wandered into their perfect lives. Her dad, Mr. Parker, used to film every school performance, church play, and birthday party like he was documenting for the Smithsonian. If there were records of anything I'd forgotten or been made to forget, they'd be there. Lynn greeted me with cautious warmth. She hadn't seen me in years, but didn't ask why I looked like I hadn't slept in days. "I think Dad kept everything in the attic," she said, leading me upstairs with a flashlight and a sense of curiosity I appreciated more than she knew. The tapes were stored in shoeboxes, labeled with black marker. Isolde, 6th bidet, Church Christmas Play 2005, Field Day, Spring. We picked out a handful and brought them down to the living room, where an old VHS player still sat beneath the TV like a relic from a more honest time. The screen buzzed as the tape started. Static, then color. There was Isolde, surrounded by balloons, a shiny tiara perched on her head. Everyone clapped as she opened gift after gift, beaming like she owned the world. And then, there I was, a smaller version of myself, holding a crooked handmade card, waiting for my turn to step forward. But just as I moved into frame, the screen flickered and cut to black. Next scene, Isolde opening another gift from someone else. No card, no me. The silence in the room was thick. Lynn looked at me, confused. Was that a glitch? I didn't answer. I rewound. Played it again. Same cut. They edited me out, I whispered, even on tape. From that moment on, it all made sense. The family photos where I stood half out of frame, the Christmas cards I never signed, the vacations they said I was too sick to attend. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was precision. They didn't forget me. They deleted me. Back on Lynn's porch, I sat with my knees pulled to my chest, notebook balanced on my lap. My pen hovered, but I couldn't write yet. I was too full of it rage, clarity, the quiet kind of fire that starts at the spine and crawls up slowly until it burns behind the eyes. I said it out loud. Not to Lynn, not to the night, to myself. They didn't just take someone else's child, I said, voice shaking but steady. They tried to erase me like I was the mistake, and I wasn't going to let them, not anymore. I warned them subtly, softly, one last time, but silence only works when someone's listening. It had rained that morning, just enough to melt the snow into slush and leave everything looking like it was thawing too fast, like the truth. I walked into the front office of my old high school wearing a denim jacket and a lie. I told the woman behind the counter I was working on a youth identity project for an alumni research article. She smiled, asked if I needed help, and unlocked a door to the back archive without blinking. The records room was smaller than I remembered, smelled like dry paper and lemon cleaner. I scanned the shelves until I found the drawer marked 2000s AL. Inside, I spotted the thin manila file with my name Kaelen Brenner, written in blocky handwriting. But something about it felt off. The letters looked rewritten, the kind of neat you do when you're covering something else. The secretary poked her head in, said I could make copies if I needed. I nodded, heart pounding. Alone again, I peeled back the corner of the folder label. Underneath, faded but visible, Maris Lynn. There it was. They didn't just rename me. They recycled someone. I opened the file. 2 pages. 1 immunization form, a blurry student ID photo, and a typed enrollment sheet. No notes, no comments, no parent signature. Just my name stapled to someone else's existence. Even my name was borrowed, and borrowed things always get returned. As I left, I passed the art room and caught a glimpse of the bulletin board. Names of scholarship winners from years ago were posted in dusty frames. Isolde's name appeared twice. Mine, not once. I didn't go back to the shelter right away. Instead, I made my way toward the church downtown. They were hosting a bake sale fundraiser that weekend, and I knew she'd be there. Isolde always showed up for things like that, camera ready, hands clasped, eyes bright, like she hadn't grown up learning how to stay cruel behind a smile. I found her under a tent, arranging cupcakes. She wore a pale blue sweater I remembered from a Christmas I wasn't invited to. The kind of knit that looked homemade, but probably cost more than a week's rent. I waited until no one was listening. "You know," I said. I checked the school files. The label on my student record had another name under it. Maurice. The name they gave me. It belonged to someone else first. Maybe you, maybe her, then me. Isolde didn't flinch, not even a pause. She glanced at me like I was just another line in a to-do list. "You were always temporary, Kaelen," she said. "They knew that. You just didn't." That was the sentence. The one that cracked something inside me, but not in the way it used to. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I straightened my shoulders, stared back, and said evenly, "I'm not alone. I'm not a placeholder. I am what survived." Then I walked. Not away from her, but towards something else, something bigger than her indifference, or their erasure. Back in the shelter, I unzipped my duffel and pulled out the envelope. Not the one with the legal papers or DNA results, but the one I'd been building for myself. Inside were photos, copies of signatures, fragments of truth they tried to smudge out. I grabbed a Sharpie. In bold, angry ink, I wrote on the front of the folder, "Not yours to assign, not yours to erase." It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about acknowledgement, about carving my name back into the spaces they'd covered with correction tape and fake smiles. The next time they tried to speak for me, it'd already be too loud to ignore. I always thought I'd be prepared for the final betrayal, that at some point the pain would dull, and I'd stop expecting them to choose me. But the truth is, there's no getting used to being expendable. It had been 3 days since I dropped off my old clothes at the shelter's donation center. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just helping sort boxes when I found it tucked beneath a folded scarf. A leather-bound planner. Black. Zipped. The kind Vera never went anywhere without. At first, I froze. My name was embossed faintly on the cover. Not mine, hers. But when I picked it up, something about the way it creaked open told me this wasn't meant to be lost. It had been discarded, like me. I wouldn't have pried, except I saw my name again. Not in a loving letter, not in a memory, but listed cold and calculated under miscellaneous on a budget spreadsheet. Kaelen cap at 6K. Temporary. No long-term return. That was it. A cost. A cap. A line item. She hadn't raised me. She managed me, measured me, contained me. There was no space in her planner for birthdays or favorite colors or tearful nights after school. but she found space to decide I wasn't worth more than a quarterly furniture upgrade. I sat with that sentence for hours, reread it so many times the ink felt etched into my skin, and then I stood up. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I dressed. Slowly, with intent. A simple black dress I'd borrowed from the donation closet, pressed and clean. I brushed out my hair, even curled the ends like Vera used to before a big event. Because appearance mattered to them. Always did. But this time, I wasn't coming to impress. I was coming to return the ledger. The gala was being held at Heritage Hall, the city's prized ballroom, where politicians and philanthropists shook hands over shrimp skewers and self-congratulation. A flyer was pinned to the bulletin board in the shelter's hallway, bold text reading, Annual Beacon Gala honoring Rayner and Vera Lestock. Of course, their favorite pastime donating just enough to stay admired, worshipped even, while the damage they did stayed buried behind tailored smiles and generous checks. My name wasn't on any guest list. I didn't expect it to be. But people don't question the ones who walk like they belong. The venue sparkled under chandeliers and paper lanterns strung across the ceiling. Music drifted over the hum of polite conversation. I kept my pace even, heart steady, scanning the crowd. I spotted them in the far back corner. Vera's hand on a wine glass, laughing lightly at something a man in a navy suit said. Rayner nodding, serious, performing importance like always. I didn't pause. My heels echoed sharply across the marble as I made my way through the crowd. Heads turned, but no one stopped me. When I reached their table, I pulled the envelope from my bag and set it between their dessert plates. No announcement, no drama, just truth quiet, cold, undeniable. You told me I was adopted, I said, voice calm even. I thought you should see what I already knew. Vera's face twitched. Rayner's fingers stiffened around his fork. Neither spoke. Inside that envelope were the photocopied planner pages, the receipts of my erasure, my birth certificate with mother crossed out in thick black ink. I had underlined a sentence in red. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting your story. That was the truth. The truth they'd masked with charity galas and manicured reputation. The truth that didn't belong in speeches or press photos. Just silence. Rayner reached for his wine, but missed the stem on the first try. Vera's lips flattened into that grief performance smile she wore at funerals tight, artificial, slightly quivering at the edges. It was the same look she gave strangers when she wanted to seem human. No one at the table spoke, not a word. Because what do you say when the evidence is your own handwriting? They didn't argue. They didn't deny. Because denial requires distance, and my presence shattered their script. I didn't wait for them to recover. I didn't need a reaction. I just needed the truth to be in their hands. Heavy, visible, permanent. I turned, walking out into the winter night. No one followed. The wind sliced through my coat, but my breath was warm. My steps didn't falter. My legs didn't shake. For once, I wasn't dragging the weight of their silence behind me. That moment wasn't closure. It was declaration. That envelope wasn't revenge. It was record. It was the moment I stopped asking for answers and handed them the mirror they refused to look into. They could go back to their champagne lives. They could sit at fundraisers and whisper their lies. But they would do it knowing that someone out there remembered. Documented. Undeniably real. And if they came for me again, if they dared to spin another story, I wouldn't plead. I wouldn't break. I'd burn the whole damn thing down and leave the ashes as my signature. They pushed back harder than I expected, but they forgot it already survived the worst part, being invisible. The county archive was colder than the air outside. Government buildings always have that sterile chill, like even the walls are trained not to feel anything. I gave the clerk the same cover story I'd used at the school, historical research for a local youth documentary. She barely glanced at me as she waved me toward the microfiche machine. It didn't take long. I was looking for property records tied to the Brenner estate, anything that might show when the money started moving. But what I found went further. A file buried under a different last name revealed a life insurance payout filed 1 year after Maris Lynn Brenner's supposed death, a 6-figure amount, paid out to a trust controlled by Vera and Rayner. They didn't just bury her. They turned her into capital, and they used me as the paperweight to keep the whole thing from blowing open. Later that week, I heard through a neighbor that Vera's mother had passed. There was going to be a memorial service quiet, small, meant for family. I wasn't on the guest list. Of course I wasn't. But I showed up anyway. I didn't wear black. I wore the same gray coat I'd had for 3 years, clean, but worn at the seams. It made me feel like myself. The chapel smelled like lilies and regret. People smiled when they saw me, then quickly looked away. Except for one. Ophélie. Vera's older sister, or maybe younger, I never kept track of who claimed what in that family. She hadn't lived in town for years. I remembered her vaguely from when I was little. She gave awkward hugs and always looked like she wanted to say something she wasn't supposed to. I stayed in the back pew, silent. Midway through the service, during one of those awkward intermissions where people whisper their condolences and refill coffee cups, I heard it. Ophélie leaned toward another cousin and said softly, "I always thought it was strange they kept Maris's dress. She was so little when they— Well, you know." That sentence didn't land like gossip. It landed like an admission. After the service, I waited by the coat rack as people shuffled out. When Ophélie came by, I blocked her path not with force, just presence. "What do you remember about Maris?" I asked, calm. She stiffened. Her eyes darted around the room. Then she leaned in and said, almost too quietly to hear, "You look too much like her." That's what scared them. That night, a man in a tailored coat knocked on the shelter's front door. He didn't ask for me by name, just handed Cheryl an envelope and walked off. A cease and desist letter, allegations of harassment, defamation, invasion of privacy, polished threats wrapped in legal stationery. I read it once, then smiled. They weren't denying a thing, just trying to make sure I couldn't say it out loud. So I made more copies. I scanned everything again, stored it in 3 new flash drives, mailed one to a journalist who'd been messaging me ever since the name Brenner popped up in a thread about sealed adoption records and insurance fraud. Her name was Rachel Ashby, fired from a newspaper years ago for going too far. My kind of woman. I didn't leave a return address. They tried silence, I whispered to myself as I walked to the mailbox. Now they'll try noise. But I didn't scare easy anymore. Even after everything, after the lies, the silence, the carefully crafted erasure, the hardest part wasn't turning over the evidence. It was watching it. For years, it buried what I remembered, pressed it down like a bruise under layers of performance and survival. But the moment I sat across from Rachel Ashby, I knew there'd be no more hiding, not from her, and definitely not from myself. She wasn't what I expected. No dramatic entrance, no whirlwind energy like you'd imagine from a journalist breaking something national. She was composed, worn around the edges, but there was something sharper underneath, like a scalpel wrapped in linen. We met at a nondescript diner off Highway 93. One of those places with booths that swallow sound and coffee that tastes like regret. Perfect for 2 women whispering about crimes that were never meant to be spoken. I pulled the USB from my coat pocket and slid it across the table. She didn't touch it, just stared at me with those clear, steady eyes and said, "You know this isn't a leak, right?" I swallowed. "Then what is it? It's a launch." I didn't flinch, but something in me curled. That night, I waited until the others at the shelter had drifted to sleep, soft breathing behind thin curtains, the hum of the heater clicking in the corners, before I walked to the library room and slipped the USB into the laptop. The screen buzzed, then flickered. The footage wasn't clean. It wavered, static creeping across the bottom like a nervous whisper. But there she was. A little girl, knees pulled up, sleeves too long. Maris. Me. The voice that came next was gentle. Too gentle. A psychologist asking questions like they were reading from a badly rehearsed play. "Do you remember what happened last time?" Maris nodded, tugging at her cuff. And what did they say would happen if you told anyone? There was a long pause. They said, her voice cracked, barely audible. They said if I talked, they'd bring the other girl. And she'd take my place. I felt my stomach drop like a stone in deep water. The room spun. I steadied myself on the table's edge. The screen jumped. A burst of white noise. Then, Vera's voice, smooth, reassuring. Poison. She doesn't know anything, she said. She won't remember. But I did. I remembered everything they didn't delete. The next morning, Rachel met me outside the county courthouse. The air was sharp with the kind of cold that made you pay attention. She looked pale, but her voice was alive. I ran the records, she said, pulling a folder from her bag. You were right. There was a civil suit filed in 2009. Plaintiff redacted. Filed against the Halverson Foundation. It was dropped within 72 hours. She paused, then looked up. But here's the twist: your name was attached. You were listed as the protected minor in the filing. I stared. I was 10. You were 10, she echoed. Vera probably filed it herself, used your identity to apply pressure. Then panicked when they realized it could backfire. They used me, I whispered, to fight their battle, and when it got messy, they erased me again. Rachel didn't comfort me. She didn't need to. Instead, she laid out the next move. Within a week, I sent out 3 identical manila envelopes, each one packed with the footage, the legal record, and a carefully written timeline. One package went to a civil rights lawyer in Seattle, someone who'd spent years battling corruption in foster care systems. The second to a podcast producer known for pulling skeletons out of institutional closets. And the third, my favorite, went to a survivor-led nonprofit advocating for women who'd been silenced by care homes and church-backed shelters. I sealed each envelope with a single sentence printed in bold across the flap. Do not protect the story, protect the girl. Then I let it go. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't even wait for confirmation. By the third day, Rachel's blog published the first article. The headline burned like a flare on a cold horizon. Girl replaced. How a child became a shield for a lie. It spread like wildfire. Comment sections lit up. Tips flooded in. By nightfall, Vera's porch was lit with the harsh white of a news van's spotlight. Subpoenas started dropping. Rainer was named in 2. And then the emails started anonymous. Tentative, but chilling. 3 separate families. 3 stories of silence. All with one thing in common. Quiet substitutions, money exchanged, forgotten paperwork, patterns, and names. But I didn't go on camera. I didn't speak into microphones. I didn't have to. My voice was already out there, carved into timelines and documents, and memories no longer under lock. That night, I walked alone down Higgins Avenue. The wind tugged at my sleeves, but I didn't feel it. Somewhere behind me, the world was reacting. Lawyers were preparing cases. Families were having difficult conversations. But I wasn't chasing justice anymore. I was breathing it. My phone buzzed. A voice message from Rachel. I pressed play. You didn't just survive, she said. You changed the story. And this time, no one could erase me. But even after the world heard my truth, I still had one person left to face myself. Downtown Missoula had returned to its quiet rhythm. The posters had been torn down, the camera crews packed up, and the whispers that once filled coffee shops had moved on to fresher scandals. I walked past the courthouse where just weeks ago people had gathered with signs, hoping for justice. Now, it stood still, its glass doors reflecting only my own steps. Vera and Rainer hadn't been charged with anything yet. Civil investigations were slow, and technicalities were slippery. But they had lost something else: reputation, friends, the comfort of pretending. Most people stopped answering their calls. Some were more blunt, using words like manipulators and monsters behind closed doors. Some endings don't come with verdicts. Some just dissolve into silence. I wasn't waiting for theirs anymore. A few days later, I drove out to see Rachel at her cabin just beyond the edge of town. The snow had melted into mud, and early spring buds poked up along the gravel road. Her dog barked once before recognizing me. Rachel opened the door, holding 2 mugs and an exhausted smile. "Everything's backed up," she said, handing me a flash drive. "Encrypted in 4 locations. You're not the only one holding the truth anymore." I nodded, not out of relief, but understanding. It wasn't about holding power now. It was about letting it go safely. We didn't talk about lawsuits or press releases. We talked about what mattered, what impact looked like when no one clapped, when healing didn't trend. That night, back at the shelter, I dug through a box I'd sealed shut when I was 14. I hadn't touched it since. At the very bottom, beneath a cracked snow globe and a birthday card from a girl I don't remember, was a drawing crumpled, faded, edges curled from time. A little stick figure girl held hands with a tall woman. The sun wore sunglasses in the corner. Crayon hearts floated above their heads. The woman didn't look like Vera. The hair was different. The smile, real. I don't remember drawing it. But it was mine. I traced the lines with my finger. I drew love before I understood lies. A few days later, I got a letter through a lawyer. Vera wanted to speak privately. I knew what she wanted, control of the narrative again. A final say. I didn't answer. Instead, I wrote a letter of my own and left it unsigned. "You don't get the last word. I already lived through your silence. No return address. Just closure mine, not hers." Now, I spend part of my week at the youth shelter, helping teens write resumes or just talk through their chaos. Some of them have bruises you can see, others you can't. I don't tell them everything about me, just enough so they know I see them, really see them. I don't need to fix what they broke. I only need to live what they tried to take. There are still nights when the past knocks, soft but persistent. But I don't open the door out of fear anymore. I open it because I know what I've survived and who I became in spite of it. I was never the lie. I was the proof they tried to bury. But I bloomed anyway. Sometimes, the things we survive don't come with applause. No justice served, no grand apologies, just the quiet decision to keep living and not let someone else's lies define who we are. If my story taught me anything, it's that truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And still, it changes everything. So I want to ask you, have you ever felt like a chapter of your life was written by someone else? Have you ever had to take the pen back? If this story resonated with you, leave a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if